Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to really get into the important details from the latest science. Okay, so imagine this. Ancient Neanderthals. Heavy brows, stone tools.
Mm.
Maybe not the first thing you think of when considering modern human neurodiversity. Well, maybe think again.
Exactly. It's quite a surprising connection.
Yeah, so today, that's our deep dive. We're looking at some pretty fascinating new research. It links tiny bits of Neanderthal DNA stuff, still in many of us today, to traits we associate with the autism spectrum.
That's right. The study comes from researchers at Clemson and Loyola universities, and it was just published this year in Molecular Psychiatry. It's really stirring up some interesting discussions.
So our mission today is basically to unpack what they found, how these ancient gene variants might shape how some people experience the world, and what it tells us about neurodiversity more broadly.
It's a big question.
It is. So first thought, how on earth could ancient DNA still be pulling strings in our brains today?
Well, it comes down to this enduring Neanderthal legacy. That popular image you mentioned. Heavy brows, tools, sure. But genetically, they're still with us. About 2%, give or take, of DNA in people with Eurasian ancestry traces back to Neanderthals.
2% doesn't sound like a huge amount, but I guess in genetic terms.
It's significant enough to have effects, and how it got there is quite a story in itself.
Right, the whole interbreeding thing.
Exactly. So you've got modern humans, Homo sapiens, migrating out of Africa, maybe around 50, 60,000 years ago. They move into Eurasia.
And run into Neanderthals who are already there.
Precisely. And they didn't just, nod hello. They exchanged genes. They interbred. We call this introgression, basically, gene flow between populations. This happened pretty soon after humans left Africa.
Okay.
And then, interestingly, some of those human groups with a bit of Neanderthal DNA later migrated back into Africa. So you get this smaller, sort of thinner dusting of Neanderthal genes across Africa, too.
So it really means almost everyone has some trace then.
Pretty much everyone, yeah. The amounts vary, but the traces are there.
Okay, so we've got these genetic leftovers. Why do they matter now? Wouldn't evolution, clean house, get rid of stuff that doesn't quite fit?
That's a really sharp question. And yes, natural selection is a powerful filter. Some Neanderthal bits were actually helpful, boosting immunity, maybe helping with altitude. Those got kept.
Makes sense.
But yeah, a lot of other variants probably didn't mesh well with our biology, and they got selected out over time, especially genes related to the brain. The brain's complex, quite unforgiving, you could say. Even small glitches can cause problems, so those genes tend to resist introgression more strongly.
Not all of them. Some slip through.
Exactly. Some slipped past that filter. And these lingering fragments, well, they often turn up in gene regions linked to things like perception, memory, social understanding.
Okay. And that's sparked curiosity about, what subtle effects they might still be having.
Precisely. Which gets us right back to this new study.
Right. The Clemson and Loyola research. So how did they actually connect these old genes to modern traits? What was their approach?
They did a really large-scale comparison. They looked at whole genome data. So the complete genetic blueprint from autistic individuals, their unaffected siblings, and also unrelated control individuals.
Okay.
And crucially, they used data from diverse ethnic backgrounds, pulling from big databases like Spark, GTEx, and the Botha's Genomes Project.
So a lot of data. What did they find when they compared them?
What emerged was, well, pretty telling. They found that certain Neanderthal-derived variants, both rare ones and more common ones, showed up more often in the autistic participants compared to the controls.
More often. Okay.
But here's the really key point. It wasn't that autistic people simply had more Neanderthal DNA overall. In fact, some autistic groups in the study actually had fewer of the common Neanderthal variants.
Oh, interesting. So it's not the quantity.
No. It's about having particular specific snippets, specific pieces of that Neanderthal code. They found what they called a dramatic enrichment of rare SNPs. Those are single nucleotide polymorphisms, tiny variations in the DNA in all the autism groups they studied.
Got it. So specific fragments, not just any old Neanderthal DNA. Did these specific bits tell them anything about, say, how the brain is wired or functions?
Yes, that was a major theme. These particular Neanderthal variants often appeared in genes that are involved in how distant brain regions communicate, long-range connectivity.
Okay, like the brain's internal communication network.
Sort of, yeah. And specifically, it looked like visual processing circuits tended to run, let's say, hotter, showing stronger signals, more connectivity.
Stronger visual processing.
Right. And conversely, the default mode network, that's the network more active when you're, say, daydreaming, reflecting, thinking about social stuff, that seemed to run cooler, quieter.
Hotter visual, cooler default mode.
Hmm.
Does that pattern match anything we know about autism?
It really does resonate with traits many autistic individuals describe. Things like very keen pattern recognition, maybe intense focus on details, alongside sometimes finding social interaction quite draining or effortful. Social fatigue, basically.
Wow, okay. That's a pretty direct link from the genes to potential brain function differences. Did they have any other evidence for this connectivity pattern?
They did, yeah. They used functional MRI scans, fMRI, from the same project, brain scans, and these confirmed the pattern. People carrying a higher load of these specific Neanderthal variants, whether they were autistic or not, actually tended to show stronger activity in visual brain areas.
Even if they weren't autistic.
Exactly. And at the same time, those pathways usually buzzing during casual chat or just idle thought, they stayed quieter.
So these ancient genes might be subtly nudging the brain towards a profile geared for, what? Intense observation.
Intense observation, maybe precise motor planning. It paints a picture of a cognitive style potentially tuned for certain kinds of tasks.
Which is fascinating when you think about Neanderthals themselves. Didn't archaeologists find evidence of pretty sophisticated skills?
Right?
Like their tool making.
Absolutely. You look at something like the Loyola technique for making stone tools. That wasn't simple napping. It required careful planning, thinking steps ahead, spatial reasoning, really sustained focus.
Skills that you just said resonate with strengths seen in some autistic individuals today.
Precisely. There's a potential parallel there in cognitive strengths, which leads to the big evolutionary question: why would these variants hang around in our gene pool for so long?
Yeah, if they're linked to traits that can sometimes present challenges in modern society.
Well, one idea relates to the environment Neanderthals lived in. They likely lived in small, tight-knit groups. In that context, maybe skills like intense visual perception spotting game, finding good stone for tools, identifying shelter were incredibly valuable, perhaps more consistently advantageous than navigating, say, large, complex social networks.
So a different set of selective pressures.
Potentially, yes. And when modern humans interbred with them, maybe those perceptual or focused talents conferred enough of an advantage, even in slightly different human social structures, that the genes responsible just persisted. They didn't get weeded out.
Okay, so let's bring this back to understanding neurodiversity now. It feels really important to stress what this study isn't saying.
Absolutely crucial. The study does not claim Neanderthal DNA causes autism, full stop.
Right. It's not cause and effect.
No. It's suggesting that inheriting a few specific genetic tweaks from Neanderthals might slightly increase the likelihood of certain cognitive traits emerging, traits that fall along a spectrum.
And these traits might have been beneficial way back when.
Exactly. They might have offered real advantages in ancestral environments. And frankly, they still often do today, right? In fields that value logic, detail, pattern spotting, thinkim, math, engineering, coding, visual arts.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the really powerful implication here, I think, is that it helps explain why autism exists globally, across cultures, independent of upbringing. It's not some modern glitch.
It reframes it.
It reframes neurodiversity as perhaps part of this deep, mixed heritage of humanity, a legacy connected to analytical talents that we often see running in families, suggesting a shared biological basis.
That's a profound shift in perspective.
Right.
So given these findings, where does the research go next? This can't be the final word.
Oh, definitely not. Researchers themselves emphasize genetics is only one piece of a very complex puzzle. Environment, early development, epigenetics, tons of other genes, they all interact in ways we're still figuring out.
So lots more work needed.
For sure. The hope is that this study sparks more investigation into how this ancient hybridization continues to influence brain development, intelligence, maybe even broader aspects of human health.
Are they looking at other conditions too?
Yeah, future work will likely look at other neurodevelopmental conditions, see if similar links exist. Also exploring how these Neanderthal variants interact with, modern lifestyles, modern environments, and ultimately maybe helping refine personalized supports.
And we should probably mention limitations of this specific study too, for context.
Good point. Yes. Like any study, it has them. Analyzing a huge number of these SNPs gives a wide view, but you need more work to zoom in on specific gene networks, understand the precise mechanisms.
Right.
There are also always challenges in genetic studies with things like self-reported ethnicity versus precise genetic ancestry, and also distinguishing true intergression, the interbreeding inheritance, from something called incomplete lineage sorting.
Which is?
That's basically where humans and Neanderthals both inherited a trait from a much older common ancestor, rather than humans getting it directly from Neanderthals through interbreeding. It can be tricky to tease those apart sometimes, so these are areas where the research will continue to be refined.
Okay, got it. So wrapping this up, this deep dive has really shown how tangled the human story is. It's not just one group replacing another.
Not at all. It's much more of a weaving together.
Yeah. Neanderthals left these genetic fingerprints, and they seem to still subtly influence how we think, how we perceive, maybe even how we innovate today.
The story didn't end back then. Their strengths got woven into ours.
So the final thought to leave you with is this. Knowing our heritage is this complex mix, this blend of different human lineages, what does that expanded view mean for how you think about human diversity and the whole incredible spectrum of human abilities?